Miriam Wright Ellerman once said, education is for improving the lives of others and for leaving your community and world better than you found it. Good evening, and welcome to a conversation with candidates for the Superintendent of Public Instruction. My name is Tracy Presley, and I serve as the Education Chair for the Wisconsin State Conference of Branches of the NAACP. It is an honor to co host this important discussion alongside our valued partners, the Wisconsin Public Education Network, the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin Early Childhood Action Needed. I am pleased to be joined tonight by members of my committee, Dorothy Harrell from the Beloit branch, Valerie Davis, and Dr. Richard McGregory from Dane County branch. For over a century, the NAACP has championed the right to a high quality education for all students. We believe that rigorous, well resourced, and student centered public schools are the foundation for a thriving society, and that every child, regardless of background, deserves access to an education that is engaging, research based, and prepares them for success in an evolving world. Our organization remains committed to advancing policies that uphold civil rights and ensures success for all students. We sincerely thank Brittany Kinser and Dr. Jill Underly for their commitment to engaging in this important conversation. We recognize the critical role that the next superintendent of public instruction will play in shaping the future of Wisconsin schools. And we look forward to working with the next leader to develop policies that strengthen literacy, support educators, and empower students to become leaders in the evolving landscape of education, not only in Wisconsin, but across the United States. And a special thank you to our moderator, Dr. Kevin Lawrence Henry Jr., and to everyone joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Tracy, and thank you to our friends at the League of Women Voters and WECAN for co-hosting this event tonight. My name is Heather Dubois-Bernard, and I'm Executive Director of Wisconsin Public Education Network. We are a nonprofit and nonpartisan advocacy organization that connects public school supporters and champions to information, actions, and each other so that we can be a stronger collective voice for all of the things that Tracy just named that all of the kids deserve in every public school in every part of the state. And we are excited today to dig into a conversation with two people who are vying for the job of our champion in chief and who want to be the ones who are going to lead the charge in making sure all the kids get all of their needs met. And we are excited today to, first of all, invite you to dig into our resources and make sure that you have all the information that you need to vote. If you visit our website at wisconsonnetwork.org/election-HQ, you can see lots of information about the election and the candidates and more. And we want to thank Dr. Underly, first of all, for joining us tonight and also for her thoughtful responses to the candidate survey that we put out before the primary. And we want to thank Ms. Kinser too for joining us today and for juggling her busy schedule to make this work after a little bit of a false start. And we know that all of you are very excited to hear from them. So it is my honor to introduce our moderator for the evening, Dr. Kevin Lawrence Henry Jr. Kevin is an associate professor of educational leadership and policy analysis at the UW-Madison, where he is an award-winning scholar of race, racism, and education policy and practice. He has served as a member of the advisory council to the Office of Educational Opportunity at the Universities of Wisconsin system. And he is also a member of the board of directors of our governing board at the Wisconsin Alliance for Excellent Schools. Kevin, thank you so much for taking on the big job of walking our candidates through this conversation today and for sharing your expertise with us tonight as well.
Thank you so much, Heather. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight for this important conversation as it relates to the next candidate or the next person who will be the superintendent of public instruction for the state of Wisconsin. I also want to thank all those who were involved in organizing this event, but I also want to make some time to thank the people that are here joining us tonight. And I also want to say thank you to Dr. Underly, as well as to Ms. Kinser, who will be having a time with us to discuss these critical issues. So I want to talk to you all briefly just about the format of the event. Candidates will have equal time to answer each question, and follow-up responses will be limited to 1 minute. To maximize our time together and focus on where the candidates stand on the issues that matter most to Wisconsin students and their public schools, we have avoided questions that cover information readily available on online and candidates' websites. What we'll try to do is make sure that we're staying within the time. And if the candidate can help us stay on time, we should have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end of the event. Those participating in our Zoom webinar can use the question and answer feature to ask questions for consideration. And we'll also ask the most pressing ones in any remaining time that we have. And preference will be given to questions that are centered on our core theme, which is closing the gaps for Wisconsin kids. So with that being said, I want to jump right in with our first question. And I'm going to start with Dr. Underly. What's your vision for ensuring all Wisconsin public school students have access to academic excellence? And what specifically will you do to address specific barriers to that access?
Yeah, well, thank you so very much. It's just really great to be here. I just wanted to thank, again, everybody who put this together, and Dr. Kevin Lawrence Henry Jr., Ms. Kinser, WECAN, NAACP, League of Women Voters, Wisconsin Child Care Network. Thank you all so much for doing this. To answer the question, my vision is that we all have, every kid in Wisconsin has access to a high quality public school education. And I have the relationships, I have the experiences, and I have the deep knowledge of what it takes to lead Wisconsin's public schools. I've built partnerships across the state and in the legislature. I also hold the necessary credentials, the licensing, and the expertise to do the work. But more than that, I'm 100% pro public school, and pro-public education is the choice for the vast majority of Wisconsin kids. And what I've done specifically is we've proposed a budget that puts kids first. It invests in mental health, early childhood education, literacy, and high standards, and we've seen results. Wisconsin's moved from 14th in the nation for education in 2020 to 6th in 2024, and now we have the highest graduation rate in our state's history, and the progress that we've made is real. But our work isn't done. So I'm committed to keeping Wisconsin public schools strong and ensuring that every child has that opportunity to succeed.
Thank you, Dr. Underly. Ms. Kinser.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation, and looking forward to the conversation today with Dr. Underly and with all the hosts. So my vision for Wisconsin education is that 95% of children will be able to read well enough to go to college, have a career or a meaningful job, or master a trade. Right now, unfortunately, 3 out of 10 children are only reading well enough to go to college or have a career. And in Milwaukee, where I live, we have the worst outcomes for our Black students, with only 5% of children reading well enough to go to college or have a career. And that's why I'm running. I'm running to restore our high standards that were lowered back in the spring, restore them back to our nation's report card levels that Governor Evers had set for us 8 years ago, and make sure that we are refocused on teaching reading, writing, and math so all children can have a meaningful job, go to college, or master a trade. Make sure that we are partnering with our parents, because they're our child's first teacher and lifelong champion, ensuring that the billions of dollars that we do have in education is getting into the classrooms, rewarding our great teachers and having less bureaucracy, and ensuring that the Department of Public Instruction is transparent, predictable, and innovative, so that we can have an education system where 95% of our children are reading well enough to be successful in college or have a career. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kinser. We'll actually start with you for this next question. The Department of Public Instruction manages about 540 employees and has responsibility to provide accurate, timely, and relevant support to all 421 of Wisconsin's public school districts. Please tell us what specifically you will do to ensure these needs are met, and what evidence can you provide that you are competent and qualified to perform this capacity? We'll then start with we'll start after you answer, Dr. Underly will share her assessment on her first terms and plans if elected. But we want to start with you to answer that question.
Yes. So that is so important that we have strong relationships and we are being responsive to all of our 421 schools, as you said, throughout Wisconsin. That is definitely one of my priorities. As I said, we want to make sure that we are being transparent and predictable and innovative. Right now, it's very difficult to find information on the Department of Public Instruction's website. I've already been researching some of the best practices around the country, bringing more transparency and predictability to the Department of Public Instruction, bringing those best practices from other states. I'm really looking forward to that as I've talked to people across the state, whether it's school districts, school boards, needing the information in a timely manner. In an accurate manner. So I'm looking forward to that. And any places that I have worked, I have always met expectations with reporting out, being able to transform different systems so that they are predictable and they are high performing. So I've had that experience. And whether I was working at the district level in Chicago Public Schools, whether I was starting my own school, working in a network of charter schools, public charter schools, or working at a nonprofit, I have been shown to be able to do create systems that are effective and efficient. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll switch to Dr. Underly. So after sharing your qualifications, please explain what have you done to meet these needs in your first term and what improvements or adjustments you will make in your second term.
Right. So my qualifications, I'm a lifelong public servant. I started 26 years ago as a teacher, social studies in a large rural comprehensive high school where I had a lot of students who were migrant students. Their parents were migrant workers in the farm fields. And then I moved into a more high performing high school, which was much more affluent. I was also an elementary school principal, a middle high school principal, and then a superintendent of a school district here in Wisconsin. I also worked at the University of Wisconsin-Madison as an academic advisor for students who struggled in college and were often first-generation college students. I also worked at the Department of Public Instruction in 2009 till about 2014 as a federal programs consultant in Title I, and then also an educator licensing assistant director. I just wanted to share, like the support that we provide school districts is really a lot of it is in advocacy and grant management. The duties of the state superintendent, obviously it's the leadership and the vision. I want to respond to the criticism that only 3 in 10 Wisconsin kids are college or career ready, because I feel that that is very misleading. Right now, it's like when you look at the data, that doesn't add up, because Wisconsin graduates every year go to college and technical school, apprenticeship, or straight into the workforce, and our graduation rate is at an all-time high. And our schools rank 6th in the nation. And so that's really, what we're doing at the department is we're providing this leadership. We're also providing the resources and the expertise and the technical assistance to the 421 school districts so that they can do this work. We do it through budget advocacy. We do it through mental health grants, advocating for breakfast and lunch for students so that they are ready to learn, and also literacy programs too through Act 20.
Thank you, Dr. Underly. I'm actually going to start with you for this next question, and it's around our current teacher crisis and licensing requirements. And so licensing and qualification has been a hot topic in this race as it relates to the credentials of the candidates. But let's talk about how and what this means to Wisconsin's educators and the many challenges they do face. What is your assessment of our current teacher crisis, and what solutions do you have? And also with issues such as the teacher shortage and the need for more teachers of color in the state, what are your perspectives on the issue of licensing and the need for greater flexibility to address our state's needs?
This is a great question. We recently, every year, the Department of Public Instruction puts out a report on the state of the educator workforce, and the news hasn't been great. I mean, we do know that we're preparing enough teachers in Wisconsin's educator preparation programs, but we know that they're not staying in teaching, and the mobility between districts is at an all-time high. I do feel like a lot of this came out of Act 10 back in 2011. That was at the time, when we reduced funding to school districts, it was around $600 per student. And so our school districts were required to have to recoup some of those costs, and it fell on the backs of our teaching workforce. And ever since then, it's been in crisis. So funding is a big way that we can help solve this problem. We haven't been able to in our school districts to give our employees any type of inflationary or cost of living increase because we're not getting those types of increases in our school districts either. And so they're being forced to go to referendum just to make operational ends meet. But funding could help, certainly reimbursing special education costs at a higher rate than the 29% that it is now would give our school districts more spendable revenue. But salary is a big piece. When you're going to college, and especially if you're a first generation college student, or if you're a person of color going into college and coming out as a first-time graduate, teaching might be an attractive career, but it isn't if you want to raise a family or be able to, pay off your student loans or a home. So we need to make sure that we are paying our staff what they are worth. I mean, it's a commitment to valuing and supporting the entire teaching profession. Teachers are the backbone of our schools, and they deserve more than just gratitude. They deserve ongoing support, sustained investment in the profession. Teacher preparation programs and teacher apprenticeships are ways that we can look at solving the workforce challenges.
Thank you, Dr. Underly. Ms. Kinser.
I am committed to advancing reforms to Wisconsin's complex teacher licensure systems and welcoming qualified individuals to enter the teaching profession. I also believe that alternative educator preparation pathways are essential to increasing the number of high-quality teachers in our schools. I'm open to collaborating with various groups and learning from other states that have implemented successful programs. Finding a solution is going to really require innovative ideas, a collaborative approach, and we have to act now to solve this problem. Under my leadership at DPI, I'll support the growth and sustainability of alternative educator preparation programs. I'm looking at what other states are doing and working with other leaders throughout Wisconsin to assess innovative approaches to address Wisconsin's education shortage. For example, there's some examples out there. Schools could alleviate the teacher shortage with their own teacher apprentice pathways, similar to bipartisan programs in 30 other states that allow for 2 years of paid real life experience before graduating. So as DPI superintendent, that will be one of my priorities to be making sure I'm listening, learning, and collaborating to ensure we have more alternative pathways and ways to support our teachers in Wisconsin.
Thank you. I'm actually going to ask a follow-up as it relates particularly to the second part of the question. As a college professor, I spend time preparing those who want to go into administration, who want to go into education. And the data is pretty clear on the importance of having educators of color in our classrooms, and particularly also having leaders of color in our classrooms. And Ms. Kinser, if you could talk a little bit more about how you think about the teachers of color shortage and what we might be able to do in Wisconsin for that.
Yes. So my last 10 years in Milwaukee, I have been working with that, working in communities of color, and it was a goal to make sure that we had more teachers from our community working in our classrooms. And so what we were able to do, we supported paraprofessionals who wanted to be teachers, supporting them in finding programs to go to school. We tried to find different alternative like funding solutions because it is very expensive to become a teacher in the setup we have nowadays. That's why I said we need to be working on different ways for alternative pathways, like that 2 years that would have these programs that are in other states, being able to pay people who want to be teachers while they're getting that work done in the schools would be huge, to be able to attract more people from communities that represent their students. It's wonderful when you have people from the community working in the schools with their students because it's then a community school. And sometimes you get parents who come in and want to be teachers. And again, that just like changes the whole dynamic. So I think it is very important. And like I said, we have to come up with innovative ideas, but also let's implement ideas we know that are working in other states. We don't always have to reinvent the wheel. And so a program that I use that I think could be useful for our communities too is when I was in Illinois, I received a special ed grant where if they paid for they gave you a scholarship, right? So they paid for your schooling as long as you taught for 2 years out of the first 5 years out of college. And that helped too. So
Thank you very much. And Dr. Underly, actually, I want to follow up on one of your comments, particularly around teacher pay and increasing the pay of teachers. And could you talk a little bit more about how you envision that? Like, what does it mean for us to have teacher pay? Folks talk a lot about it, but increasing teacher pay, but what does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, we need to ensure that teachers are paid fairly for their hard work. And, while pay is ultimately determined at the local level, I have advocated for policies that give districts more flexibility and resources to offer competitive salaries and benefits to attract and retain talented educators. So like it's tied up to revenue. And when you look at the number of school districts that have gone to referendum in Wisconsin, they're doing it because they need to, and they can't keep the lights on. They can't pay their staff. They can't give them raises. And teacher pay has lagged. It's 20% less right now than it was 15 years ago in real dollars. In other states, we're losing teachers from Wisconsin to other states because they just can pay more. Illinois is a good example of that. But we also can't cut corners when it comes to licensure. We have to make sure that our staff are fully licensed, that they have the content knowledge, and then they have the classroom expertise. I've proposed different items in my budget that expand on the programs that we already have in place, like teacher apprenticeship and grow your own programs. I've also suggested in the budget that we pay student teachers and we invest in teacher mentors who will support these new teachers. But really, we have to look at the whole teaching profession, and we have to make sure that there's a growth and career ladders for people so that they can move up within teaching, become lead teachers, become specialists, so that they don't feel that they have to go into administration in order to earn more pay. And it's really important, especially for first generation college students and teachers of color. When you go into education or you major, let's say in math or chemistry or English or any of the areas, and then you graduate from college and you have an option of, getting a job in the private sector, that would pay 2.5 times what you would start as a teacher. It's really a no-brainer for a lot of people because those skills are transferable.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, we'll start this next question with Ms. Kinser. Wisconsin has some of the most shameful gaps in the nation, and these gaps have widened every year with budgets that segregate resources and opportunities away from priority needs. On the most recent NAEP assessment, Wisconsin had the largest achievement gap in reading of any state. Students of color, students with disabilities, students living in economically disadvantaged households, including rural students, and students who are English language learners are most routinely and disproportionately impacted by these policies. What accountability for closing these gaps, what would accountability for closing these gaps look like in your administration?
We have got to take accountability at the state level for how our children are learning or not learning. Like I said, we only have 3 out of 10 children, according to our nation's report card, as you called it, NAEP. And for our Black children in Wisconsin and in Milwaukee, it's 5%. It is not okay. This is a crisis. That's why I got into this race. We have got to hold ourselves accountable. We have got to make it transparent. We have to make sure that it's easy for all of us to know the information. Right now with Act 20, they're taking Ames Web testing in the early grades for reading. We know how students are doing. We know if they're exceeding or not, if they need to have an individualized plan. We need to make sure that parents are aware, school boards are aware, we're transparent about that data. That's accountability first. And then ensuring our schools are getting the support they need, like making sure that we have, they're getting they're using the research and evidence-based curriculum. They're getting the support with coaching if they need it. We have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to set clear goals, growth goals, and then proficiency goals, because we know the research shows 95% of children can learn how to read well enough if you're using science of reading and phonics in the early grades. There is a town in Ohio that did not use balanced literacy for the past 30 years. It's in the podcast Told a Story. If anyone's listening, wants to learn more about the history of reading, Told a Story is a great podcast. But there's this school in Ohio, which is a great example. It's a Rust Belt town. 85% of children are living in socioeconomically disadvantaged families, but they're all reading. They're all reading on grade level. It is possible. So we have to take accountability for it and ensure our schools are getting the support they need, making sure school boards have the information they need and the parents. And I know my time is up.
Thank you. I actually want to. I'll wait till the music stops. This is the awards show. I actually want to follow up on that, particularly as it relates to the transparency and thinking about some of the research-based evidence that we do have. Across the United States, we see the importance of issues around culturally relevant teaching, multiculturalism, ethnic studies, all of these being mechanisms in terms of instruction that assist in lowering or lessening the gap, particularly for students of color. You mentioned earlier about the disparities that we see, particularly in MPS and in Milwaukee writ large, and those are communities that are overwhelmingly students of color. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, for instance, instructional practices that have in some ways come under attack as it relates to equity, as it relates to issues around diversity, culturally relevant teaching, and how you might in your administration address that.
Yeah, so when I think about this, it's really important that kids learn how to read, right? And if you don't know how to read, you don't have a future ahead of you. Like think about all of us right here. I wouldn't be here today if I couldn't read. I wouldn't be in this room. And so we have to make sure that we're using research and evidence-based curriculum, and we have to make sure that our teachers are trained. They've been educated on how to teach phonics. Like I went to a teacher school. I came out and had learned, I realized, oh my gosh, I wasn't taught how to teach reading, and I was a special ed teacher. And so as I opened up schools too, I found out many of my teachers also were not taught how to teach reading. And so we have to make sure that our children have teachers in front of them, like you said, that can are from the community, but also are taught how to teach reading. And I think that is something that's so important. And of course, culturally relevant stories that they're reading, but we've got to make sure.
I lost that last little bit. Could you say that? Just repeat that last bit you were saying about
Which part did you?
culture,
Sorry, I don't.
the culture,
Yeah, I said, of course, they need to have culturally, gosh, relevant books in the classroom that they're reading. But our kids need to learn how to read so that they can access those books. And so making sure that, going back to the teacher pipeline too, making sure that there are teachers from the community in the classrooms.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Underly, same question for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to kind of add or clarify something Brittany said earlier. The podcast is called Sold a Story. not told a story, it's sold a story. It's by Emily Hanford. And
Thank
it's a
you.
great
Sorry.
podcast. No, it's a great podcast. I recommend people listen to it. But you know, with the racial achievement gaps, I mean, critics have argued that DPI has failed to provide strong leadership on closing these gaps. But what I would say is that, yeah, they're absolutely right. We should all be ashamed of it. These gaps are absolutely unacceptable, but we know how to solve the problem, but it takes money and it takes effort, and we know it works. It goes back 30 plus years to Tommy Thompson in his effort to defund public schools and send funding to unaccountable voucher schools. And this goes back to the refusal of the legislature to fund public schools and the efforts that they make to defund public schools. And I say, give us the tools we need to do the work and we can get it done. Give us the funding, but the laws that they pass prevent us from doing that. As I say, we know it works. High standards for literacy and math, absolutely. High quality instruction, early childhood programming, special education, well-trained teachers, passionate teachers, after-school programs, career and technical education, engaging curriculum, mental health support, and school nutrition. We know what works. And you see these items, you see these programs, you see these policies in place in high performing school districts. And in the school districts that don't have them, they also likely have facilities that are crumbling as well. And again, it's like we know what works. It takes money though to do it.
Thank you, Dr. Underly. I'm going to follow up because we actually, what's great, our next question is around funding adequacy, but I want to follow up. I'm wondering how, you've had your first term, and I'm thinking about, now I'm running out of time. I'm thinking about this question about working with legislators, because you've mentioned that twice. How do you approach this work? I mean, could you talk a little bit more about this? We know we need more funding, but how do you build that that support? How do you build the bench for folks to actually come on board and to do this necessary work around the funding?
And I like how you phrased that, building the bench, because that's what we have been doing at DPI. We've been building this bench of leaders in DPI, civil servants, who when I came in, we had to rebuild the agency. It was COVID, and we had a lot of people retire. We didn't fill those positions in the interim. And so when I came in, we had a lot of work to do, and we had to build up our teams again. And one of those was, a priority of building relationships with the legislature. And I made it a priority to build relationships and foster productive dialogue, even when we don't agree. And under my leadership, DPI has significantly improved our engagement with legislators. We've taken a team approach to speaking with them nearly every day and testifying on key bills. And this has created a more respectful and collaborative environment, even in the face of political differences. Public education is nonpartisan. This position is nonpartisan. We work with both sides, and we've successfully helped pass bipartisan legislation like Act 20.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Underly. This next question will start with you. The relationship between funding and achievement, or resources and results, is complicated and often politicized, with districts increasingly forced to go to referenda to fund the basics. How can we ensure accountability in terms of increased performance while also removing barriers to achieving equity, like the special education funding gap, and ending our 16-year-old cycle of state budgets that have failed to keep pace with inflation? What specifically will you do to ensure that the state is meeting its constitutional obligation to provide a sound, basic public education for every student?
Yeah, this has been my goal, and it was one of the very reasons I ran for state superintendent in 2021. It was because of funding and equity. In 2017, I had the privilege of presenting, it was in Fenimore at Southwest Tech. I had the privilege of presenting to the Blue Ribbon Commission on school funding. I was a superintendent of a small school district in Southwest Wisconsin at the time, and just educating legislators about the troubles that our school districts have making ends meet. Since 2023, so since the last time we passed a budget, so the 23-25 biennium, but since 2023, it's around 50% of Wisconsin school districts have had to go to referendum. And you go back, I know I went back to Act 10 with 2011 and when we lost around $600 per student. But it goes back even further than that, when they froze revenue limits in 1993 and our school districts were locked in to whoever they'd been spending it the previous year. And we've been stuck in these cycles of referendum ever since, and especially low spending districts. What we've learned actually from assessment is we're very good at testing and finding out which school districts have high poverty, because there's a correlation between high poverty and low test scores. And I'm not saying it's all, across the board or universal, but generally speaking. And so we have to really look at our school funding formula. We also have to look at the fact that we are funding two systems of schools, public schools. We're funding the public school system, which accepts all kids, including students with disabilities. And then we're funding a voucher system where we pay private school tuition, and they don't take all students. And so when we look at these large referendums in our cities, especially, there is a correlation between the rise of the voucher program too, and the expansion of vouchers. So we have to invest in our public schools if we're going to get through this problem. And I will have to sue the legislature if they don't fund our public schools.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Underly. Ms. Kinser?
Can I go back and answer? You asked the question about working with lawmakers. Can I answer that question?
Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah.
So I have a proven record of working with the legislature and getting a bipartisan bill passed 2 years ago. That was, I worked with the Republican leadership, also with Democrats in Milwaukee that signed on. So it was a bipartisan bill, plus the governor's office. And I think it's really important to be able to have those relationships, because we do have to work together to make sure that our children are getting the resources that they need. And so I do have relationships with both majority leaders and Democrats in the legislature and the governor's office. So I do want to say that. So I think that is key to making sure we get what we need for our children. Okay, and then the other part was?
I'm just curious, can you talk about because I've only been in Wisconsin for about 4 years. Can you tell us about the bill that that you worked on?
Yeah, so Act 11, 2 years ago, so the last budget, we were able to get more money for all students, all public schools, also some more money for public charters and students who receive the voucher program, the voucher, who live below a certain income level, and also money for mental health. And so the governor, so it was the Republicans plus 5 Democrats in Milwaukee and the governor's office signed that bill. So it was a group effort to get more funding for all the schools and then some other areas that the governor prioritized.
Okay, thank you. And so I just want to go back. I know we were kind of we're moving a little in and out of time, and actually our next question is about vouchers and charter schools. But I do want to give you an opportunity to answer this question around funding adequacy. So I'll give you, I think we'll put the clock back on just to ensure that you can answer that question for us.
So one thing that I have learned as I've traveled over 12,000 miles in less than 100 days, meeting with people all over the state, is that everyone agrees that our funding formula system is broken and we need an upgrade. Schools are operating with limited resources, and taxpayers are concerned and tired of actually paying the referendums. As I said, I hear it all over as I travel the state. So Wisconsin's funding formula needs to be modernized, and I promise to be a leader in that. As I said, I have relationships on both sides of the aisle and report the governor's office. We have to make sure that it's updated. We also need to make sure that the reimbursement for special education is increased. Possibly there's 30 states across our country that don't use a reimbursement model. So a reimbursement model, like my first year being a principal, I had 20% of my students were in special ed. I spent $1 million. So you had to take that, this is schools across our state, you have to take that out of the general ed fund. And then you get reimbursed the next year. I think we got reimbursed at 30%, if I remember, this was like 12 years ago. And now it's, still 30%. So we have to increase the special ed reimbursement. It is, we have to. And so I promise to work with districts across the state and our legislature and the governor's office to improve that. It's like, as I watched as Milwaukee leaders like Mayor Johnson and County Executive Crawley worked across the aisle, attended meetings with Republican legislators and the governor and all the other stakeholders, and they modernized the shared revenue formula that hadn't been changed for decades. So I know that it's possible.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to start the next set of questions with you, Ms. Kinser, particularly as it relates to our questions or considerations around school choice. So you did mention Act 11, and I'm just curious about if you could talk a little bit more or describe your position on the impact of voucher and charter schools and what impact those have had on students attending public schools or traditional public schools.
The impact, so living here in Milwaukee, we've had school choice for over, 3 decades. And almost half the children's families are choosing to send their children to a public charter school or a private charter school, or sorry, private charter school. There's no private charter schools, private school with a voucher. And so we know from polling that 60% of families want school choice. And so in Milwaukee, it is decoupled. It is not it does not affect the property taxes. It is state aid. It is a state program. So I have been on record I was on the board of Wisconsin Charter School Advocates. I'm on record for saying decoupling is a way to take that off of the tax bill and not complicate it for our public schools and have it paid through state aid. So that's what the decoupling bill is. It didn't get through this last time, but I am on record for decoupling.
Okay, we'll talk. That's actually the next question, but I want to give Dr. Underly an opportunity to address this one, and we can come back to talk a little bit more about decoupling.
All right. So, I guess I just want to say that I strongly believe that public dollars should be invested in public schools, where all students, regardless of their background or needs, have access to that high quality education. And what we're seeing is, studies from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction have shown that, MPS students who are in the voucher program are not outperforming Milwaukee public school students. They're all scoring below the state average. And so my philosophy on this is that we need to invest in the system that takes all kids, which is the public school. And we need to make sure that we are investing in the teachers, and we are investing in the curriculum, and we are investing in the facilities and in the programs that will help all children be successful. I am strongly against using public dollars to fund the private schools. The Act 11 that Ms. Kinser referenced before, now we have high school voucher students getting more money per student on their voucher than public school students in high school are getting. And like I said, like the studies show that voucher school students in MPS vouchers are not outperforming MPS students. And we also need to look at that in Milwaukee, we have 35 to 40% of the students are going on, these are MPS students, they are going on to college after high school graduation. And we really need to start looking at how we can continue to support, again, a system that supports all students. I also just feel like, again, this goes back to the school finance question. When we look at the referendums and the sizes of referendums, we again need to make sure that we are using that funding for public schools because they are the ones that are accountable to local school boards. They license their teachers fully. And again, they're the ones that are accountable to the public.
Thank you, Dr. Underly. I'm actually going to start the next question with you, and this is a bit more kind of delving into this question of decoupling. And so I'm just curious, what do you think of the proposals like the decoupling bill supported by voucher lobbyists that would guarantee voucher funding directly through state aid as opposed to through the education budget? And could you talk a little bit more also about how this policy change in funding private and charter schools and that being implemented, how that would impact, I guess, our general set of resources for public school students? Oh, you're muted. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. What decoupling does is it ties voucher funding to public school finances, concerns about the financial impact of public schools and local property taxpayers is what I was referencing earlier. And what decoupling legislation would do was it would fund voucher programs. I'm sorry, because it can mean a couple different things depending on how I phrase it. It would fund voucher programs directly through the state's GPR. Therefore, it would eliminate the need to reduce state aid to public school districts for voucher students. So like when I talk about the money that is being transferred from our public schools to voucher programs, it's because our state finance system for schools, it's just one pot of money. And I've talked about this before where it's like pie. You've got this pot and then the share for vouchers keeps getting larger and then the share for schools gets smaller, and it could lead to additional transparency. I just fear it wouldn't lead to additional funding for public schools.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Kinser, do you want to add anything? I know you did mention the decoupling in your stance, but if there was anything else you wanted to add.
I do want us to start talking about the children and families that use the scholarship who live at a certain income level. We talk about vouchers as an object. These are children. These are families. In Milwaukee, it's mostly Black and brown families living in poverty. And we're saying we're going to take this option away from them. I'm wondering how often people who want to take away this option have gone into the communities and asked the families, why are you choosing to use the voucher to send your child to this school? Because I've had those conversations, and it really changes when you start thinking about the actual 40,000 families and children. And you hear from the families on why they're choosing this program that's been available to them for 30 years. And then to say that you're just going to cut it off without any solutions and send them to schools that are failing. We know what's going on at MPS. Well, we kind of do, right? I just think we need to start talking about families.
Okay. Thank you. I actually want to kind of follow up on that. How do we, or how do you more precisely balance some of the data? We've talked about accountability, we've talked about transparency and the importance of having data. How do we make sense of this perhaps desire for vouchers and school choice and compare that or have that held in tandem with some of the data that suggests that these schools are not inherently outperforming our traditional public school counterparts?
So when we talk about, so it depends on the school, right? So there are some schools that are doing well in each of the sectors, right? Whether it's traditional public schools, charter schools, private schools. So you look across the board. The elementary schools that are receiving vouchers, they receive about $7,000 less than the traditional public school. So this isn't dollar for dollar, right? Like the money isn't following the child. And that was something that was eye-opening to our Milwaukee families when we were able to show them 2 years ago. Do you know, like we have this thing called school choice here. Some people don't even know. They've been here for 30 years and they have options, right? They grew up having options. And so there are many families that send their child to all three different. Now, one is at a private school, another child's at a charter school, another child's at a Milwaukee public school. And they didn't realize the funding was different. They were actually very upset. Again, this is the transparency. We have got to let our families know if you're going to send your child to this school, you're getting about $5,000 to $7,000. And so I think we've got to make sure that we are informing families on all the issues and then 100%. They should know how that school is doing. They should know how much it's getting funded, and then they can choose what they want to do. But I think we need to make sure, I believe that we need to make sure that we are informing all families on all the issues. It really makes a huge difference. And it's exciting because people want to help and make change.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move a little bit forward because we are actually running out of time. But I want us to move to this question around civics education and graduate requirements. And so this question actually comes from our partners at the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. What is your position on mandating a half-credit graduation requirement in civics education? And could you explain your answer a bit more on that? And would state funding be needed for you to support this or other legislative policy proposals?
Is that for me?
Yeah, that's for you.
Oh, I didn't know who we were. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't know which one. So mandating a half credit graduation requirement in civics education. I think civics education is very important. And so I'm supportive of having the civics education requirement. I'm going to be honest. I don't know the mandate, and I haven't talked with the League of Women Voters about this specific. So I'm supportive of course, of civics education. And would state funding be needed for you to support this? I would have to look into the cost of that, to be honest. So, of course, I'm for civics education. I'm not sure of the cost. I'd have to look more into that.
Thank you so much. Dr. Underly?
This is great because this is really near and dear to my heart. I'm supportive of civics education, but I'm against additional mandates, and I'll explain that a little bit. But civics education is really important. At the Department of Public Instruction, we already have released a civic scope and sequence. And that means districts have guidance on implementing civics instruction, including standalone courses. But it's scope and sequence all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade. And what we learned when we were doing this project was that many school districts in Wisconsin already offer civics courses. So a mandate may not necessarily be, mandate may not be necessary, but we have to think about the funding and the resources too. I mean, civics is incredibly important when you talk about civil dialogue and being able to think critically about issues and to debate. If a statewide requirement were introduced, it would require state funding to ensure proper implementation, but because it includes materials. It's what we learned from the literacy bill, right? It includes materials, professional development, resources for districts that do not currently have a standalone civics course. But we also have to think about teacher licensing and capacity issues too, because a new mandate would require properly licensed teachers, because in Wisconsin, in social studies is where I think this would likely fall. To be licensed to teach civics, you have to be licensed in government. Otherwise, it would be a challenge given the current educator shortage, especially in rural areas, because without additional staffing and licensure, a mandate could create an additional burden on schools. But I'm also in favor of local control and flexibility. And so then rather than a mandate, I would favor encouraging and supporting civics education through funding and professional development, using the scope and sequence that we developed, but also local decision making. So if they want to make that part of their graduation requirements, they can, and they can implement civics in a way that is best fit for their students.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so we're going to actually start with you, Dr. Underly, for the next question, which is around childcare. The governor's 2025-2027 budget requests for special education includes measures intended to build relationships between schools and the child care programs. Explain how this additional funding will better meet the needs of children and their parents for those who qualify under IDEA. And this question is from the Wisconsin Early Childhood Action Needed.
I keep muting myself. It's like a habit. No, this is an issue that's entirely near and dear to my heart, because when you look at high performing school districts and you look at where the healthy kids are, and the happy families, childcare is a big piece of that puzzle. And with the year of the kid, I'm really hopeful that we can come to some bipartisan agreement on that childcare is a workforce issue, but it also, I mean, studies show that when you invest in high quality childcare and preschool programs in your school, the return on the investment is more than tenfold. Kids are doing better in elementary school. They're doing better in literacy and math. They're scoring higher on their achievement tests, but they're also healthier. They have more social skills. If they've got special education needs, they're being identified earlier. And so what the governor is proposing is this community-based school partnership program, which is a collaboration between public schools and community organizations like nonprofits, local businesses, early childhood centers, even higher education institutions. And it would provide accessible, affordable, high quality childcare and early learning for families. And this would support working families because it offers before and after school programming, early childhood education, wraparound services. It would expand access to early learning, like I said, by integrating preschool and childcare into the school system, and then would leverage community resources, to create the sustainable, locally driven solutions to childcare needs. And how IDEA fits into this is inclusion of children with disabilities. I think that's incredibly important, making sure that all kids are included. Early intervention, like I mentioned before, which is part C of IDEA, and that serves infants and toddlers, birth to 3, and then preschool special education and training and licensing of teachers. And then, of course, we could also apply for more funding with IDEA with that to support inclusive learning environments.
Okay, thank you so much. Ms. Kinser.
I think it's early education is very, very important, and relationships and collaboration with different programs of schools is something that I've always had to do, especially since I came to Wisconsin, partnering with different organizations to support before and after care for our students, and ensuring that there is high quality programs in our preschools and our K-4. I know from teaching or having 125 little 4-year-olds, my first year as a principal here, we were able to implement a program with reading. Again, I'm going back to reading, and being able to teach 4-year-olds how to read by the end of K-4 was huge as they go into kindergarten being prepared. And being a special ed teacher, of course, we want to support our students who are receiving special needs, special needs resources and programs. So I'm in support of making sure that we are partnering with programs to support our schools at all times.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to move to a follow-up question. We're going to actually start with you, Ms. Kinser. This is also from WECAN. How do you envision partnerships between child care programs, the Department of Public Instruction, and the Department of Children and Families progressing?
Sorry, I'm trying to get off of mute. So I think this is where, again, the relationships are really important, where the Department of Public Instruction is partnering with programs that are and departments that are specialized in other areas like Department of Children and Families progressing. So I don't have a relationship with them right now, but building those relationships are key for all of our schools. As I've been talking with superintendents and school leaders throughout the state, putting all the focus on the schools to figure it all out is not working. We have to have partnerships and relationships to support our schools and supporting our families and our kids so that our schools can focus on the teaching and supporting in other ways. We need to have relationships with other organizations and departments.
Okay. Thank you so much. Dr. Underly?
Sure. I think it really starts with a shared vision, right? To ensure, for example, that every child in Wisconsin has access to affordable, high quality early learning, because that's really an issue. And I think, with that vision, we can strengthen those connections between early childhood and K-12 education. Lots of school districts are having site-based childcare because there's a need. There's a lot of childcare deserts throughout Wisconsin. And that creates workforce challenges. And so again, I also would go back to, how it would promote inclusion of children with disabilities and multilingual learners. And the Department of Public Instruction, we could provide curriculum guidance to align early childhood programs to our Wisconsin K-12 standards. We can also support professional development by licensing early childhood educators and expanding pathways. Again, we can also ensure that IDEA supports are available for children with disabilities. We can also explore ways to fund 4K expansion, which we have been putting in our budget for as long as I can recall, to have full day 4K, for example. The Department of Children and Families, they oversee childcare licensing regulations, the Young Star quality ratings, and they could also, and they had done this during COVID, but they could work to expand Wisconsin Shares, which is the child care subsidy. And also they could, advocate to support more workforce development by increasing wages, because that's a big issue right now and has been for a long time with child care workers. And so if they were connected to the schools, that they could offer, better salaries, for example, and benefits. The families and caregivers, they're really connected to this because they are in desperate need for affordable, high quality childcare. And they've been incredibly engaged. But, we can support them through access to resources and family engagement programs, as well as community-based support.
Thank you so much. So we're gonna actually start moving to our, I guess we can call it our lightning round, our speed round. We're nearing the end of our conversation tonight. And so I'm gonna actually start with you, Dr. Underly, for this next question. And this is, leading a nonpartisan office in a time of partisanship, the politics and partisanship that allows our kids to be used as political footballs is clearly standing in the way of doing what's right by Wisconsin students at the State House. Given this reality, what is your plan for navigating the political landscape in our state and moving your own priorities forward if elected or reelected? Or more precisely, more reelected in your case?
Um, you know, for me, the guiding light has always been kids. And when I was the superintendent in a school district, and I had a nonpartisan school board, but of course, people, politics has, as they say, is not our fault, but it is our problem. Politics have been part of education forever. When you think back just to COVID, or you think back even before that to, well, Act 10, then there was the Nation at Risk, there was desegregation of schools and Brown v. Board, and this teaching of evolution. Politics has always been part of that. But for me, it's really about the kids and what's best for kids. And right now, when I look at the landscape of education or public education in Wisconsin, we are not fulfilling our constitutional obligation to provide a high quality education to every kid. It's dependent on the zip code. And so we need to work through this funding issue. And I think there's bipartisan support to get it fixed.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Kinser.
Thanks for this question. I have promised families, school leaders, community leaders across the state that I will use my relationships that I already have with the leadership in the majority, the Republican majority, my relationships with the Democrats, my relationships with the governor's office and local leaders to do what's best for kids, because we have to put politics aside. And in this nonpartisan race, I'm very proud of the support and respect I've gotten from Democrats for education reform, and then all the way to Governor Tommy Thompson. And it just shows that you can come together. You can come together in support of kids when you're really looking out for the best interests of the children. I have not met anyone, when I talk about how I want all kids to read, no one has disagreed with me on that. Everyone wants all children to read. It's an American value, right? We want all of our kids to read. And I promise to continue working with my people I already have relationships with for our students.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, we'll start with you, Ms. Kinser, for the next question. Governor Evers announced last week he is suing to protect Wisconsin students from potential federal funding cuts and threats to constitutional rights and the freedom to learn. Do you support the lawsuit, and what would you do as superintendent to respond to federal mandates that could have a negative impact on Wisconsin students?
I have said this repeatedly. We must get the funding from the federal government to fund our schools. We have about 14% of schools' budgets that support our students with special needs, students for Title I, the money that we use to teach our children how to read, write, and do math. Full stop. We have got to have that money. And I will be an advocate for that. And I am now and going forward. We need to have someone that can talk to the current leader, McMahon, so that talking with her about what the plan is, because we don't know what the plan is, and it's causing a lot of anxiety, but we have to be calm and be able to come up with ideas on how to address when the changes do happen, or if they do happen, be able to have a plan and be able to have conversations with those who are making those decisions, because it will, if the money is just coming straight to us, will be giving us more power and DPI and control. And we have to be able to make sure our schools are getting that funding.
Okay. Thank you very much. Dr. Underly.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I mean, I've been incredibly vocal about this, and we've been engaging with the Wisconsin's congressional delegation. We've been leveraging our national organizations. I know that the governor is connected to the National Governors Association, but I'm also on the board for the Council of Chief School State Officials or Officers, excuse me, CCSSO. We've also been engaging the public and like with the maps that we released with the federal funding and showing what the impact it would have on every school district and what percentage of federal dollars are in their school district, how many positions. And what we're learning is that these cuts, right, the funding cuts are going to harm Wisconsin students, especially in rural and high poverty districts. And we need to look at how we can strengthen our state and local funding. And I've also been very vocal that if we're going to look at efficiencies at the federal level, first of all, we're very efficient in government, but any savings that come from those cuts in staff need to come to the states. We need to see that funding.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to move now to our concluding remarks before we actually get to the question and answer. I do want to leave some time so that we can address the questions from those in our audience. We'll give you 1 minute each to provide concluding remarks. But before we do this, is there anything you'd like to add to one of your previous answers, or anything we didn't ask you tonight that you'd like Wisconsin voters to consider or know about you before they cast their ballots on or before April 1st? And you'll have 1 minute each. We're going to start with Dr. Underly.
And I'm sorry, is this in addition to the closing statement?
Not yet. We're going to get to the closing remarks, but we're kind of in our closing chance. So anything that we didn't discuss yet.
Okay. And so I guess what I would say is that, I have the leadership and the vision, that I have the proven leadership, working bipartisanship with Republicans and Democrats to get things done. We are seeing incredible progress coming out of COVID. Of course, there's so much more work to get done. Of course, we want to make sure all kids are successful with literacy and math, that they have engaging programming throughout high school, especially with pathways for career and technical education. We want to make sure our kids are successful when they graduate from high school and can pursue the career or the college of their choice. But the way through this is we cannot do this without adequate school funding. And Wisconsin is struggling. You see it by the number of referendums, and we have a legislature that doesn't seem to be very concerned about that. They're happy to pass that on to the local taxpayers, and we need to end that.
Thank you. Ms. Kinser.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. I want to address that I've been called a voucher lobbyist by Dr. Underly's campaign. And I want to say that I spent nearly a decade in Chicago public schools both in the classroom as a special education teacher, and then also at the district level when Arnie Duncan was there. I spent another 10 years working in the public charter school space as a principal and in leadership positions. And I think sometimes people unfortunately forget that charter schools are public schools. And finally, I want to be really clear about this. I have never worked for or in a private or religious school. I'm not a privatizer, and that claim is patently false. And I support school choice. I support families having the options to send their children to any type of school that we offer. But I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that I have been endorsed by the Democrats for education reform last week, along with, Governor Tommy Thompson and Dr. Fuller. So I just want to make sure that that is cleared up. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Before we move on, I want to, Jill, Dr. Underwood, do you want to have a chance to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. I guess what I would say in response to that is that Ms. Kinser lobbied for um, these independent charter schools and vouchers. She doesn't have a license, for example, which has raised questions with voters, and so she advocated for policies that wouldn't require licensing for teachers and administrators. And I think that that's important. That I think it's also important to understand that I don't believe she fully understands how public schools work in Wisconsin. She's made this claim routinely, for example, that only 3 in 10 or 30% of kids are able to read or that they're college ready. And that makes absolutely no sense. I mean, because we've made incredible gains in Wisconsin, how could we be 6th in the nation for schools when if that were to be true, for example, and that's absolutely not the case. We're 6th in the nation. We have the highest graduation rates in state history. And I think my vision has had a lot to do with that.
I have to correct Dr. Underly. Dr. Underly, I do have my license. I paid the $185 to update my license. I had a license when I was in Wisconsin as a principal. I had a license when I was in Illinois as a special ed teacher. I have a degree from an Ivy League institute, but when I got here, it was so difficult to move my license from New York and Illinois to Wisconsin. These are the barriers that we need to take away as we're saying we need more qualified teachers. So I would hope Dr. Underly would understand this, as she has said, she understands that the teacher shortage is real and educated and attracting others here. I come with licenses from other places, got a degree at Columbia, and now I do have my, I paid the $185 to update my license. We did this a couple of weeks ago, so just to make sure everyone understands that. And I worked at a nonprofit where I was lobbying for equal funding for all of our children. And as I said, the governor also signed on to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Ms. Kinser. We're going to actually start with you. And so I just want to actually thank both of you for this conversation tonight. This more than likely will possibly be the last conversation before voters go out. And so I do want to thank you for this time that you've had with us. So before we move to the audience question and answers, we'd like to give you both time to tell supporters of thriving public schools why they can trust you to close gaps in Wisconsin schools. So Ms. Kinser, we're going to start with you on this question.
Yes. So when I opened up my public charter school here 12 years ago, after 2 years, the time Superintendent Evers, now Governor Evers, gave us a Beating the Odds Award for closing gaps, achievement gaps, academic gaps. And then we went on to get more of those awards later on. I've been able to work with the legislature and the governor's office and parents and people across our state to have a huge increase in funding for all of our children in Wisconsin. And now I'm running an initiative where I'm trying to help more children read proficiently. And so I promise to continue to work across the aisle, work with leaders, work with parents, work with teachers to ensure all of our children in Wisconsin have an excellent education and that we can get to 95 college or have. That's a quick minute.
Minutes go quickly. That last bit, I do want to give you an opportunity to say those last moments that you were.
I think I said so that 95% of all children can read well enough to go to college or have a career. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And to hurry.
Yes, Dr. Underly.
All right, thank you so much. And again, thanks to the organizers. Thank you, Ms. Kinser, for being part of this important conversation, and to everyone who took time to listen and engage. Look, I'm running for re-election as state superintendent because I believe in the power of public education to transform lives. My vision has always been every child, every day, and it's more than just words. It's a commitment to ensuring that every Wisconsin student, regardless of their background or zip code, has access to opportunities and the support that they need to thrive. But I know that belief isn't enough. Trust is earned through actions, and that's why under my leadership, Wisconsin has made real progress. As I mentioned before, we've moved from 14th to 6th in the nation for education. We have the highest graduation rates in state history. We're making critical investments in mental health, literacy, early childhood, teacher recruitment and retention, and strong academic standards. We're closing gaps in achievement and opportunity. I mean, that's the heart of this work, but it takes a lot of time and energy and effort. And we know that gaps don't just happen in the classroom. They stem from disparities in funding, resources, access to quality educators, and student support services. And so I'm going to continue to push for increased funding so that we can invest in our kids.
All right, thank you very much. So I want to try my best to move to the questions and answers. If you've had a chance, I don't know if you all have had a chance. The chat is very lively. So I'm going to try to cover as many questions in the remaining 15 minutes that we have. So I'll start with this. This is for both candidates. In recent years, there have been increasing political attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in Wisconsin's education system, including efforts to restrict curriculum that addresses systemic inequities, culturally responsive teaching, and support for historically marginalized students. As state superintendent, how would you advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion in our schools, ensure that all students feel valued and represented in our schools, and in their learning environments, and protect educators who are committed to equity-focused teaching? And we'll start with Dr. Underly, since you were the last person to respond.
No, thank you very much for this question. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're not just buzzwords. I mean, that's the thing. They are essential to creating an environment where every student can succeed. For students with disabilities, students of color, English language learners, rural students, veterans, women we employ in our schools, DEI is not optional. It's a strength, and we have to look at it as such. Diversity enriches our classrooms by bringing in diverse perspectives, experiences, and ways of thinking. Equity ensures that every student, regardless of their background, has access to the resources and support that they need to be successful. And inclusion is a fundamental human right. And it's about making sure that every student feels that they belong, that they can contribute, and has that opportunity to reach their full potential. And in Wisconsin public schools, DEI efforts should be woven. They should be woven into the fabric of our educational experience. They don't distract from core academic subjects, they enhance them. And as state superintendent, I will continue to champion these initiatives because they're critical to providing the kind of inclusive, equitable education that our students deserve.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Kinser.
Yeah, so we want to make all of our children feel welcomed and safe in our schools, and ensuring that they have a teacher that motivates them and inspires them, and a school where you come in and it's joyful and everyone is learning, and ensuring, and this is the biggest thing, when we look at in Milwaukee, we only have 5% of Black children reading well enough to go on to college and have a career. And this isn't just something made up. I know you're saying something about 6 in the country, but this is real life. Like, our children need to learn how to read. If they can't read, they can't go on. They They can't join the military. They can't go into the trades if you can't read well enough. And the military has just come out saying that they can't take 70% of applicants. This was just in a new report. And NPR just did a whole report on our nation having a reading problem. So the best part I think that we can do is make sure our children can read so they can have a future, and making sure that they do feel welcomed. And I do want to say with DEI, that is a local control issue. We need to make sure that the local school boards and school districts are implementing their programs for their schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up, you're saying that diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that should be under local control.
It is under local control. Like, so if DEI, the program in Milwaukee may look different than it does in Rhinelander or Green Bay or different areas like that. So I've done a lot of work in DEI in the schools where I worked. We had lots of programs and goals around that, making sure that our schools were diverse and have equitable programs and inclusion. So
Okay,
that
you.
was based off of what our school plan.
Okay. All right. So we're going to start this next question with you, Ms. Kinser. If elected, will you work with legislators to ensure that all schools that receive taxpayer funding must submit data for school-wide report cards?
They already are supposed to. That is the law. So yes, I would want to make sure that they all are, and we want to hold everyone accountable to meeting deadlines, making sure that the data is actually something we can find and it's easy to read. There are report cards and dashboards that, like, Indiana does a great job, Louisiana, Mississippi, and I want to make sure that Wisconsin also has a way to, when we do collect that information, we also have a way that's really clear, that's on a dashboard, so that everyone can see that data. So yes, we need to do that, and we must hold everyone accountable to it.
Dr. Underly?
Okay, thank you. No, I of course think that they should be, all schools that are participating in the voucher program should submit data for school report cards in the same way that public schools do, but they don't. So private schools that participate in the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program and the Racine Choice Program, and then and there's the third one, I can't recall the name of it. They submit their data to DPI, but only private schools with only at least 20 choice students in the tested grades receive a choice pupil report card from DPI. So, I mean, there's ways that they get around this, and they're separate from the public school report cards, and they only reflect the voucher students and not the full student population of that school. So, I mean, there's differences in accountability, and I would want them to be the same. I'd also want our public schools to have the same flexibilities that we allow independent charters and choice schools, if the school district wanted those. But it does lead to equity and transparency concerns. We need to put this information also on our state tax bills as well, property tax bills.
Can I add to that? Just, I agree that we need to make sure that there is less complexity for all of our schools. And so making sure that it is easier for schools. Like you said, there are something that the independent charter schools that don't have to do for the traditional public schools. So of course that we'd want to make sure that all the schools, are able to be held accountable in the same ways.
All right. Thank you. We'll start this next question with Dr. Underly. The viewer says, over 50% of school districts in Wisconsin are considered rural school districts. Many of these districts have significant gaps, especially with our students who come from poverty. Many of these districts have significant budget issues, decaying infrastructure, and significant shortages in staffing. Often legislation, such as Act 20, puts requirements on these districts that simply cannot be met in our current system as is. How would the DPI under your leadership support districts who cannot raise the funds or find the staff to meet these sorts of legislative mandates?
Sorry, I keep on messing up with that mute button. No, this is really important and it's very timely. Wisconsin rural school districts, they have a lot of similarities, honestly, to urban school districts, but they face significant challenges like declining enrollment, staff shortages. I mean, and as the viewer said, there's around 60% of them are rural, aging infrastructure. But the thing that really seems to be hurting them recently is the unfunded mandates. And while DPI can't independently allocate funding, we can support rural schools through advocacy, strategic partnership, resource sharing, grants, for example, and those kinds of initiatives. And so I will continue to advocate for increased and equitable funding, as I've been sharing throughout this evening. I know that the legislature has explored expanding virtual and shared services for school districts, and for a variety of reasons, that's really difficult to do. But we need to look at recruiting and retaining rural educators. I think that's the way we can do through loan forgiveness, grow your own programs, and working with the UW System and Technical College for more pipeline programs.
Thank you. Ms. Kinser.
Yeah, so I have talked to superintendents in the rural areas, and I've promised to work with them and use again my relationships that I have in the legislature and the governor's office, and the ways that I have worked to inform families and school leaders and teachers and how to mobilize around an issue when their new funding is needed. And like I've said, I will be a leader in helping with modernizing the funding formula, with getting an increase in special education. And, we use an outdated reimbursement is an outdated way of paying for special ed. There's 30 states across the country that use a different way to fund special education. It's not by reimbursement. It's they get paid for it in the moment, right? Like they get it, not in the moment, but they get the payment that year. And so I would want to look to best practices to ensure that our schools get the funding that they need to be able to operate.
All right, thank you for that. This question is somewhat similar to the question around DEI, but it's actually more specific to LGBTQ students. So I'll start with you, Ms. Kinser. Do the candidates believe schools have an obligation to support LGBTQ students? So essentially, your perspective on this, particularly as we consider some of the calls around trans rights and students who are gender nonconforming. So if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, all children should be welcomed in school and feel safe and get a great education. And so I'm 100% that students should be supported so that they can come to school and learn. That's very important.
Dr. Underly?
Thank you. I've made prioritizing all students feeling welcome and safe in their schools, not just LGBTQ, but students with disabilities, Black students, and other students of color. And I've been very vocal about not just achievement gaps, but opportunity gaps. And I've prioritized also mental health support, anti-bullying initiatives, and promoting inclusive environments for all students, including LGBTQ students. And I fought for policies that ensure basic needs are met, so that all students feel that they belong in their school. They need to have adults in their school who see them and, that they know that they can talk to and who care for them. And that's why in my budget, I've also proposed investing in anti-bullying and peer-to-peer mentoring programs and including more social workers and school psychologists, because public schools are for everyone and every child should see themselves as belonging in their public school.
Thank you, Dr. Underly. This may very well be our last question. I'm looking at the time that we have here. The viewer asks, how do we tie funding to successful outcomes? So I'll start with Dr. Underly and then we'll move to Ms. Kinser.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there should be accountability. I mean, these are public tax dollars. It's one of the largest expenditures that we have in the state of Wisconsin, and that's the role of our local school boards. That's why we elect them, and that's what their job is, to oversee student achievement and to work with the school administration, who then works with the teachers and parents to make sure that our kids are successful. And that's where a lot of the accountability is. Report cards are great, but there are other measures of student success in our school district. For example, the number of kids who are, participating in activities like band, for example, or forensics or athletics, the number of bullying incidents that we have at our school to measure, the safety in the school, the types of academic programs that we have in our school, like AP and transcribed credit or transcripted credit or dual enrollment programs. But then also looking at, the quality of instruction and making sure we're investing in our teachers. So there's a lot of different ways we could be accountable, but the funding is really important so that we can make sure that our schools are successful.
Thank you. Ms. Kinser.
Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, I've got so many on here, but essentially
Sorry.
how
It's
do
not
we,
on the slide, so.
it's no longer, it's like, how do we hold our schools accountable, particularly as we're considering the relationship between achievement and accountability?
Yeah, so we need to make sure that we update the report card. I think everyone has been asking for that as I have traveled across the state, that they want the report card updated. It's hard to understand that the standards have changed, the cut scores have changed. And so they want updated report card that's easy to access, easy to understand, able to see progress over the years with growth and proficiency. And so that's the way that school boards can use the report card, and families and school districts hold themselves accountable to great results for kids, is to make sure that we have data that is consistent and is and it's aligned. Like I had said, I would restore high standards back to what we used to use, but making sure that the report card is something that we can use and easy to define.
Well, this is the closing of our time together. As much as I'd like us to have more time together, unfortunately, we are out of time. I would like to thank our candidates, Ms. Brittany Kinser and Dr. Jill Underly, for spending this evening with us. I'd also like to thank the participants who were able to spend some time and ask the important questions to these two. I also want to thank I want to thank the Wisconsin Eye for live streaming this event. Many thanks to the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Early Childhood Action Needed, the NAACP of Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin Public Education Network for this opportunity to get to know Wisconsin's next superintendent of education. Wisconsin Public Education's network's election headquarters page will archive this forum, as well as responses that the candidates have provided to the survey and others, and much, much more. So please share these resources widely and encourage everyone you know to vote on April 1st. Thank you again for your time, and I wish you all the very best. Have a great night.
There. And thank you to our moderator, Dr. Kevin Lawrence Henry Jr., for leading this conversation tonight. We are all so grateful to all of you, and we invite you to join us in our upcoming budget advocacy. This race matters much to the upcoming budget passage, so we hope you'll join us in that conversation too, and that you will be part wherever you can tag in making sure that Wisconsin kids have what they need, both at the ballot box and beyond. Thank you so much to everyone who took part in this day, and we hope we'll see you at our upcoming events. Thank you, Ms. Kinser and Dr. Underly and Dr. Henry, for your participation in tonight's event, and to all of our co-sponsors. Have a great night, everyone.